this group. Okay. We are recording the meeting. So welcome everyone to the online panel on AI regulation in practice, compliance and governance in the EU and UK. This is organized by the PSA Specialist Group on Technology, Internet and Politics, and we are delighted to invite you to this engaging online discussion concerning how governments, how different authorities are going to implement the different regulatory framework that are currently developed or entered into force in the EU, in the UK, or being prepared in the UK and all over the world. So in this panel, we'll explore the evolving landscape of AI regulation, especially focusing on the implementation and compliance timelines and phases. In particular, looking at the EU AI Act, but not only, also the UK legislation and UK AI bill in particular being prepared right now or discussed at least. We'll look at procedure to set up the whole system for the EI Act governance from the EI Pact, the GPAI Code of Practice, EI Office, national authorities, and other aspects of implementation phase, but also we'll try to touch on the ongoing debate surrounding the UK legislation that is being discussed, that is being prepared in the last few months on the topic. This event brings together experts on different aspects from different disciplines, from law to political science, to other social sciences. And the idea is to try together to answer some of the questions that are raised when looking at the compliance and implementation phase. For example, what are the best strategies for ensuring compliance with the EU EI Act? How will be the timeline for this new regulation applied, and how are the UK stakeholders adapting to the evolving discussion on the UK EI bill, and so on. So I'm Julia Sandri. I'm the moderator. I am member of the Technology, Internet and Politics group, but also I'm research fellow and scientific advisor at the University of Brussels, of Université Libre de Bruxelles. And we welcome today Conor Dallon from at the Lovelace Institute. He's European Public Policy led, but also Tekla Emborg, who's EU Fellow at the Future Life Institute, also from Belgium. Francesca Fanucci, who's Senior Legal Advisor at the European Center for Non-for-Profit Law Setting in the Netherlands. And Inga Ulnikane, who's a Research Fellow from the University of Birmingham. They will have around 10 minutes each for their presentation, and then we can have a discussion together. The order will be Tekla, then Inga, then Francesca, and then Conor. So if that's okay for everyone, Tekla, the floor is yours. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for the invitation, Julia. Let me see if I can share my screen. There we go. Does it work? Can you see that I'm going to be talking about the implementation of the EU AI Act? My name is Tekla Emborg. I'm a EU Policy Research Fellow at the Future of Life Institute. And today, what I hope to contribute with is some overview of the timelines of the implementation of the AI Act, as well as what we know so far about the national implementation plans. Yes, the Future of Life Institute is the org behind the AI Act webpage, which some of you may know. And we have also adopted this very helpful implementation timeline, which is, I think, a great tool. I've tried to take out some key points of that to give you an overview, first of the product categories and when different obligations will apply to different types of AI systems based on their risk categorization under the AI Act. So, of course, the whole Act entered into force the 1st of August. Prohibited systems will be prohibited from the 2nd of February 2025. GPAI models, so general purpose AI models, their obligations will enter into force, or they will apply from the 2nd of August 2025. And when providers and deployers will have to comply with these obligations, it depends, and it actually is a little bit later. The rest of the AI Act, except for high-risk systems. Can you hear me well? Was there anyone wanting to say something? All good. The rest of the AI Act will apply from August 2026, and then these particular high-risk systems from Annex 1, which already have requirements under product regulation in the EU, will apply from 2027. Then we have particular authorities that actually by the 2nd of November last month, member states had to identify authorities that are responsible for protecting fundamental rights in their member states. Member states have to designate 2 other kinds of national authorities by the 2nd of August 2025. I'll look into that more in a second. Member states have to lay down rules for penalties and fines, also by August, and the European Commission has to establish the AI Board, the Scientific Panel, and Advisory Forum, also by August 2025. And then member states also have to establish at least one operational sandbox by 2026, August. So there are a lot of deadlines and timelines, and this is just a tiny bit of all the points in the coming 5 years that are important. So I would recommend that you check out our timeline if you need further specifications. There are 3 types of national authorities that have to be designated or identified under the AI Act. First, there are these public authorities protecting fundamental rights, which had to be identified last month. And these are existing authorities which get a few extra tasks or abilities under the AI Act, Article 77. Then there are market surveillance authorities, which build upon this pre-existing idea from EU law of market surveillance authorities, and they should ensure that all products that are placed in the EU market actually comply with the EU laws. Secondly, we have these notifying authorities, which are responsible for establishing and performing, checking the procedures for assessment, designation, and notification of conformity assessment bodies and monitoring. So these all have to be designated by 2025, the last 2. On our webpage, the AI Act webpage, we also have an overview of the national implementation plans for 27 member states. And when it was updated earlier in November, for most member states, it was unclear what their national competent authorities would be. So that's the notifying authority and the market surveillance authority. And it was also unclear what the fundamental rights authorities would be. These were not identified, even though that was actually a deadline by the 2nd of November. Maybe some general ideas. Let me see how we're doing on time. 2 minutes probably. Okay. Some general ideas from the fundamental rights is that typically member states who have implemented it, and by now I think that's around 17 member states, 17 to 20. It's typically like data protection authorities or the ombudsman that have been identified as authorities, but of course it varies from member state to member state. Some have pointed out 3 authorities, some have pointed out 14. And with regards to what we know about the national competent authorities, which has a later adoption deadline, so we don't know that much yet, but some establish completely new AI authorities, others designate the Ministry for Digitalization, and again, other point to, for example, Finland already point to 10 or more different existing market surveillance authorities that they expect will take care of different parts of the enforcement of the AI Act. A few thoughts on the success of AI implementation. First of all, it will be really important with effective coordination and collaboration across member states. The enforcement of the high-risk systems will fall to member states, and so it's really important to learn from the lessons from the GDPR, so that we don't have certain member states who will have a huge backlog in cases. And of course, the AI board might also be helpful here in ensuring cooperation across member states. A second element is to ensure sufficient resources for the AI office and for national competent authorities. Part of that is attracting talent. We have, for example, Axel Voss, MEP from the EPP, writing an op-ed today, actually encouraging proper allocation of resources to the AI office to actually take the EU AI Act seriously, and that it will need resources to enforce effectively. And with regards to talent, then I can give a heads up to everyone present here that the AI office is actually at the moment looking for legal and policy officers. The deadline is, if I remember correctly, the 15th of January, and you need 3 years of experience or so in digital EU digital policies. But I encourage anyone who's potentially interested, give it a shot. We need good people to join the AI office. I think that's my contribution. I look forward to our discussion.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Tekla, for also staying perfectly within the allotted time. And now the floor is to Inga. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And let me share my slides. So thanks a lot for invitation and thanks for organizing this very timely event. I will talk about politics of regulation. My name is Inga Ulmetsane, and over past 7 or so years, one of my key research topics have been on artificial intelligence governance, policy, and politics. And one very interesting thing to watch during this time has been a major shift in AI governance from ethics to regulation. If we think some 5 years ago, major focus was on various artificial intelligence ethics guidelines and frameworks. According to some colleagues, there were something like more than 100 different AI ethics guidelines coming from national governments, from civil society organizations, international organizations, and also industry. This strong focus on ethical guidelines also got a backlash. So it was criticized for ethics washing, namely that so much focus on voluntary ethics guidelines is also motivated by strong vested interests by industry, which are using these guidelines also to avoid or delay voluntary binding regulation. This has shifted in recent years because in recent years we have seen that many national governments around the world have turned their attention to developing AI regulation and also adopting AI regulation. And we sometimes talk about major players in AI, such as United States, China, and European Union as being very different approaches. But all three of them in recent years have adopted some artificial intelligence regulation. And also other countries around the world have either followed some of approaches coming from these leading countries. For example, several countries have followed also EU risk-based approach in developing their regulations, or they have also developed their own approaches to regulation. And so approximately a year ago, there seems that everyone is very much focusing on AI regulation. However, very recently, there has been major change. And this major change has come from a recent US presidential election, where new incoming president Trump has announced that he plans to dismantle previous AI regulations, which have been adopted in the United States by current President Biden. For example, his executive order which was adopted approximately a year ago in October 2023. And so we can expect that there is major change in US. We can talk about regulatory backsliding, similar to democratic backsliding. And this change in US also has important implications for other countries around the world because US is a major player in AI, and also most important AI companies are based in the US, such as Google, such as Meta, such as Amazon. And this has also been a topic recently on agenda on many AI policymakers around the world. What will this policy change in US will mean to other countries? At the time of US election, I was in Australia. I was talking to Australian experts on AI policy and regulation. And one of the topics on their agenda was, yes, what will be the consequences of new administration in US for AI regulation. And what will consequences Options B remains to be seen. It's important to start thinking about them. And if anyone has any ideas, I would be very interested also to discuss during Q&A. But we have already seen one change, and namely that is change in AI policy debate in public discussions about AI. What we have seen in recent weeks that there is very much intensification on this focus on this debate, regulation versus innovation. By regulation, often meaning EU approach, by innovation, US approach. And we have seen, for example, on a certain social media platforms that there is a lot of attacks on EU regulation, motivated by, again, by industry interests, and that there are caricatures made of regulation. And this kind of, I would call it false dichotomy, this debate on regulation versus innovation, because it's very much based also on some very false promises. For example, it assumes that innovation is always good and we need as much innovation as quickly as possible. And it also very often assumes that you have to choose either to have innovation or regulation, but you cannot have both. And these premises are very wrong, and there is a lot of evidence for that, because innovation and regulation have been going hand in hand in many sectors. We have seen it for many years, for example, in aviation sector, in pharmaceutical sector, and so on. It's not necessary to choose. They can both coexist. Also, some people are concerned that there is not enough innovation, and that is valid concern. But at the same time, if there is not enough innovation, there are many multiple complex factors why there is not enough innovation. It can be related to finances, it can be related to skilled workforce, and so on. Yeah.
Can you explain about the Dutch child benefit scandal, please?
Yes, I will. Thank you. Yes, so if there is not enough innovation, so there are many different factors, and just blaming lack of innovation, insufficient innovation on regulation is very, very too simplistic. And also this assumption that innovation is always good and not there is that we need as much innovation as quickly as possible is also not true, because there's a lot of evidence from past that innovation can be both. It can be good, but it can also be very problematic. We have seen a lot of problematic use cases of AI, of algorithms, also on over recent years. One very well-known case in Europe is so-called Dutch child benefit scandal, when Dutch authorities used self-learning algorithm to assess risks, and just on assessment of this algorithmic assessment of risks, people were asked to pay back their benefits and accused of fraud, which then caused a big political scandal when it came out, and the Dutch government has to resign. And if anyone is interested, we can also discuss this Dutch case later in Q&A, and there are many other similar cases. And so rather than focusing this debate on this simplistic kind of dichotomy, regulation versus innovation, which we see a lot recently, it's much more important to shift this focus to think how to support responsible innovation, to support innovations that is socially beneficial, and where also regulation has a role to play to really protect societal values and societal interest. Of course, there is an open question: what kind of regulation supports societal interests and protects them well? And we have seen a lot of this discussion also in recent years, also related to EU AI Act, if it is sufficiently protecting societal interests and values or not. And that's a very useful debate to have also during implementation of EU AI Act. And then speaking about implementation of EU AI Act, where Tekla already provided great overview, I would like to highlight one ongoing thing at the moment, which is drafting general purpose AI Code of Practice. So this comes from EU AI Act, that there will be voluntary code of practice to contribute to the application of the EU AI Act's obligations for general providers of general purpose AI models. So example of general purpose AI models would be, for example, large language models such as ChatGPT, which was launched 2 years ago and which was also very much being discussed in policy and governance debates over past 2 years. Many of you might remember that also last year around this time when EU AI Act was in its final stages, there was a lot of debate about these large language models and how to regulate them. So at the moment, this work on code is going on, and there's a lot of information about the code from politics of AI regulation. I want to highlight one interesting aspect, which is collaborative, that this development of code happens as a collaborative and multi-stakeholder process. So there are around 1,000 experts and stakeholders from academia, industry, and civil society who applied through open call. And I am one of those 1,000 experts, and maybe some of you are also involved. And this code is drafted by independent chairs and vice chairs of 4 working groups and commented by these 1,000 stakeholders. And this process of drafting takes in iterative way in iterative way. There are 4 drafts planned. First draft was already in mid-November. Second draft is expected this week, and it is expected that it will be finished by April, by 1st of May. And when this drafting will finish, then AI Office and Board will assess this code, and the European Commission will decide if to approve this code. And in various timelines that Tekla showed before, she also showed that these obligations for GPAI models come in force in 1st of or 2nd of August this year, and that's when also this code is planned to play a role. And really one interesting thing about this code is that it is developed as a collaborative multi-stakeholder process because in this area of AI governance, over recent years, we have had a lot of discussion about involving stakeholders and what would be appropriate ways for involving stakeholders. So it is interesting that this is organized in this very inclusive manner with multiple and diverse stakeholders contributing. And that is also important because it is voluntary code and providers will have to sign up. And one of reasons for this very inclusive process is also if these providers are involved early and can contribute, then it's also more likely that they will sign up. One of challenges in this very inclusive process so far seems to be that the timelines are quite tight, also for providing feedback. For example, this week we are expecting second draft, and one of concerns is that the time for feedback will be over holidays at the very end of December and early January. But it is one interesting thing to keep an eye on how this code develops in a broader AI regulation and governance ecosystem. And also, of course, see how these broader issues about regulation and ways to protect societal interests and values, and also support innovation, how this process develops. So thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Inga. And now the floor is for Francesca, who's gonna present how fundamental rights impact assessment work under the EU AI Act. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia, and thank you everyone for having me here. I'm going to try and share my screen right away. Okay, here is, I hope you can see my presentation. Perhaps I can also share full screen. I'm not sure how this is. Cannot find a way. Okay. Can you see it? Okay. Thank you. Just a brief disclaimer about ECNL and our mission. We advocate strong policy and regulatory standards for the protection of civil space, even when the impact of digital technologies is affected. So what I'm going to provide here is the perspective of civil society in this context. And since I was asked to talk about compliance with AI rules on fundamental rights impact assessment, I would like to start by reminding that a fully fledged human rights impact assessment includes three types of assessments that are connected with one another. One is the narrow impact assessment, which considers both positive and negative implications, in this case of an AI systems, for the people and the environment in which they live and act. Then there is a phase of this impact assessment which consists more specifically on risk assessment, so the identification, the analysis, and the evaluation of threats and vulnerabilities of the system. And finally, there is a phase of risk management which identifies the possible measures or resources that can be used to minimize or possibly even eliminate the likelihood of harms and negative implications. When it comes to the AI Act of the EU, we have two provisions that specifically concern impact assessment. Article 27 is the one that is normally referred to as the one that introduces fundamental rights impact assessment obligations. But we also have Article 9, which is a provision for providers of high-risk AI system, which mandates a risk management system, and we will see now. So providers of AI systems which are classified as high-risk systems in the AI Act have to set up a risk management system which has these characteristics. First of all, it is iterative, which means that it has to be conceived as a repeated process throughout the life cycle of the AI systems at stake. This system has to include identification and analysis of all the known or reasonable foreseeable risks to health, safety, and fundamental rights as well. So when the AI system is used for its intended purpose. The system also has to include other measures like the estimation, evaluation of risks in cases of potentially foreseeable misuse of the system and other potential risks that may be identified after the system has entered the market when the data gathered from the post-market monitoring systems are analyzed. And as I mentioned before, this management system has to include also all the potential measures that will be used to address, mitigate, or eliminate the risks previously identified. And this was, like I said, the risk management system is mandatory for providers of AI systems classified as high risk. Whereas when it comes to the fundamental rights impact assessments as defined by Article 27, this is an obligation imposed on deployers, so users of AI systems in the public sector and in some cases in the private sectors as well. And these cases specifically are those of AI systems deployed by the private sectors on behalf of the public sector, so on behalf of governments or institutions, but also the AI Act establishes this obligation for the provision of essential private services where AI systems are used, namely for AI system used for credit scorings, for example, to assess if individuals are worthy of being assigned credit systems, or, for example, in the risk assessment or pricing of life and health insurance provisions. Now, these FRIAs, the acronym that we use, are meant to complement the already existing obligations for data protection impact assessment. And they have to include a description of the process used by the AI system for its estimated purpose, its intended purpose, how often and how frequently it will be used for the provision of that service, which people or groups are likely to be affected, what are the risks mitigation measures, and what are the measures provided for human oversight, internal governance, and complaint mechanisms. The results of these FRIAs will also have to be published. They will have to be stored in a public database, although, as we will see shortly, there are sweeping loopholes and exceptions for AI systems, high-risk AI systems used in law enforcement and migration. And there, exactly, we wanted to share some reflections on the challenges to the effective implementations of these norms. First of all, the AI Act introduces these obligations to report these risks, but there is no clear obligation to assess what to do when the impacts, so if the impacts are acceptable or not, or what to do when these impacts are considered are not acceptable, or how to prevent them where possible. So the users, the deployers, only have to specify which measures will be taken once the risks materialize, but not what they will do in cases these risks cannot be mitigated at all. Now, another big disappointment for us as advocates during the AI Act approval was the fact that there is no obligation for engagement of external stakeholders when conducting these impact assessments. So there is a mention of the opportunity to include civil society and the people affected by AI systems in the recital of the AI Act, but there is no clear-cut obligation for a multi-stakeholder engagement in conducting these impact assessments. Another problem, as I already mentioned, is that when it comes to the fundamental rights impact assessment conducted by law enforcement and migration authorities, there is no obligations for these bodies to publish the findings of their FRIAs. So they will have to conduct them, they will have to store them in databases that will be available to the Commission, to the national authorities, but they will not be publicly available. And even in those cases where the information is disseminated or stored, there is no obligation to describe the logic of the AI systems. There is no obligation to register the real-world testing results. And they will not even have to include the complementary findings on data protection impact assessments. So as you can imagine, these are really sweeping loopholes in very crucial sectors, and we expect that there are going to be challenges in implementation. Finally, the right to lodge complaints to the market surveillance authorities are not clear on how, basically, once these authorities establish that there are breach provisions, what they will be able to do to make up for them. And finally, I also wanted to raise that here we are in the context of the EU AI Act, but There is another instrument that was negotiated in the last 2 years, which was the Council of Europe Framework Convention on AI and Human Rights, Democracy and the Rule of Law, which was open for signature in September. And since the UK is not a member of the EU, but is a member of the Council of Europe, they took part in these negotiations and they already signed these conventions. Now it's expecting to be ratified. One article of these conventions includes obligations to conduct assessment and mitigation of risks. So the correspondent FRIA obligation, that this is the one that will directly apply to the UK for any sorts of legislation. And indeed, now the Council of Europe is also negotiating non-binding methodology and models for conducting this impact assessment. So this is something that we recommend also, watching, because it may have a more specific influence on any upcoming UK legislation. Thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to questions if there are any later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesca. That's very, very interesting. And now I'll give the floor to Connor. And then after that, we'll have a bit of a general discussion. Connor, are you there? Yeah, good. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Hey, thank you so much. Please excuse the scarf. It's a little bit cold in the room that I'm working in. Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm Conor Dunlop. I'm the European Policy Lead at the Ada Lovelace Institute. As you can maybe see from my title, I'm more focused on European policy generally, but today I'm going to speak about UK legislative developments. So if there's any UK experts in the audience, please forgive me if I get anything wrong. I've basically crowdsourced this information from my UK policy colleagues. So yeah, I'm going to speak about 5 developments in the UK regarding AI legislation and also data protection, because I think we can't really talk about one without talking about the other. So these 5 developments are firstly the Data Use and Access Bill. Then I will talk about the AI Opportunities Action Plan. I will talk thirdly about the Frontier Models legislation in the UK. Fourthly, I will talk about the ICO. So this is the UK's Data Protection Authority, their response to generative AI that was recently published. And finally, I will talk about a consultation on copyright and text and data mining that proposes an opt-out model for content owners. So yeah, that's 5 things. I'll try and speed through them very quickly because I only have 10 minutes. So yeah, the first one is the Data Use and Access Bill. So this builds upon and follows from what the previous UK government did with the DPDI bill, which aimed to update the UK's GDPR. So what the Labour government has proposed is with a different name and some different provisions, but it somewhat follows in the same vein. And it's the Data Use and Access Bill, or the DUA bill. So it includes provisions on sort of like access to data, basically provisions to enable new data sharing models between organizations, and it aims to increase data portability and innovation. So I think those provisions generally seem palatable to civil society and industry. And yeah, so there's some broad support on those sort of smart data sharing provisions. But that being said, there are some civil society concerns with the DUA bill, or the DUA bill, and I will briefly list these here. The first is that it removes existing safeguards on automated decision making. Secondly, it makes it easier to reuse data for scientific research, which sounds great on the surface, but there's some concerns about how scientific research will be defined, because basically it would likely include commercial research activities. So this might be, quite a broad interpretation of what kinds of scientific research, and may allow for very liberal reuse of data, which is a concern for some. Thirdly, it introduces recognized legitimate interests. So this removes the need to balance against individual rights and gives organizations again more freedom to process data. So that's something that civil society is paying attention to. And finally, it gives very extensive ministerial powers. So this would allow ministers to modify the rules directly through secondary legislation, and this generally has less parliamentary scrutiny than what would usually be the case for updating UK legislation. So that's the Data Use and Access Bill. Secondly, I would like to talk about the AI Opportunities Action Plan. So that was commissioned through the 2023 AI Safety Summit, and it will be published early next year. And in practice, this will probably look something like an industrial strategy for AI in the UK. So it will focus on a few areas. Likely, it will look at compute and other infrastructure needs for AI training and inference. It will also look at sort of skills development and training programs. It will look at AI assurance and testing. And yeah, broadly, broadly measures aimed at just ensuring the UK can compete globally on AI. So yeah, I think probably in a similar vein to maybe what like the Draghi report has been calling for in the EU, and possibly some parallels to the AI Development and Cloud Act that the Draghi report suggested, and that would be pursued under the new EU Commission. So that's the AI Opportunities Bill. There is also an upcoming legislation on frontier models. So probably that this is the one that has the most attention, and maybe people on this call will be most familiar with. So that was a manifesto commitment from the Labour government. So yeah, it will be forthcoming probably early next year. There will be a consultation on this, and we expect that it will formalise the UK AI Safety Institute's role and put it on statutory footing. And yeah, it will be, as you can guess from the name of Frontier Models, it will focus on the most advanced AI models. So we would anticipate it will have quite a narrow scope in that regard. It will probably only capture the largest AI developers. It's a bit unclear if they will do that via sort of compute thresholds or by focusing on maybe capabilities and particular risks of concern. But yeah, whichever risk they identify, it'll probably be sort of in the realm of CBRN and national security risks, possibly. Some things around loss of control. So these sort of like large scale frontier risks. So yeah, quite narrow, and that means it's quite unclear how the UK government intends to proceed around sector specific regulation of AI. The previous government did set out some AI principles to empower regulators to have some oversight in sector specific regulators. But it's a bit unclear if the Labour government will do something similar. At least at ADA, where I work, we really want them to outline an approach on top of this Frontier AI Bill to say what they're going to do for a more comprehensive AI Act type piece of legislation, because we anticipate there will be gaps in this governance framework, particularly when it's just focused on frontier AI risks. So that's the third one. The fourth one, I will go a bit quicker with these ones. So there was the ICO's generative AI guidance recently published after a 5-part consultation that it ran. So this basically is the UK's Data Protection Authority giving guidance for model developers on how they can ensure AI development is compliant with UK data protection law. So for any data protection experts in the audience, maybe this is worth taking a look at. And it aims to basically give practical steps to help companies comply with data protection law if they are using AI for developing and deploying, or using data for developing and deploying AI. The final one is the consultation on copyright and text and data mining. So this was a joint initiative by UK government, so DCMS, and also the Intellectual Property Office, and it proposes an opt-out system for content owners. So yeah, the consultation focused on that, and it also looks at the technical challenges for implementing opt-out. So yeah, trying to address some of the technical challenges, for example, from tracking content across platforms, and tries to provide solutions to these implementation issues. And yeah, I think I will stop there. I hope I'm still on time. That's sort of a bird's eye view of 5 recent developments on AI and data protection in the UK. Looking forward to the discussion. Thanks.
Perfect. That's perfect. 5 issues, 2 minutes each, perfectly within the 10 minutes deadline, limit. So that's perfect. Thanks. Good. So I'd like to open the floor. If someone has any question from the audience. Otherwise, I have a couple of questions that I can use so just to get the discussion rolling. No? Anybody? Okay. Well, I'll start. I'll start with the first question was actually for Tekla, and I was wondering, I mean, maybe mostly for the audience, if you can maybe say a couple of words for explaining the difference in terms of powers and roles of the EI office and the EI board. Can you tell us more about what's the difference between the two? Thank you.
Yes, the AI board has representatives from all the individual member states, and it has already met a couple times. Whereas the AI office is, a body that's been established under the DG Connect as part of the European Commission, and it has powers to and is tasked with enforcing the AI Act, particularly with regards to general purpose AI models, where it's kind of centralized, but also has a range of other coordinating tasks, and sometimes can take action if member states' surveillance authorities pass on things to the AI office. So the commission body, the AI office, is not as such supposed to be representative of the member states' interest, but is really working with only the enforcement. And the AI board is a broader, maybe to some extent a little bit more political. I can put in the chat the relevant articles in the Act if that's helpful.
Yeah, that would be great for our audience, I think. Thank you. Sarah had a question. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Really interesting talks, and there's always that disconnect, it seems, between the sort of production of law and then the implementation, what it's going to look like in different countries. I think that something that really came up for me probably during Connor's presentation was this idea of data research and when it's okay to use data for research. Like as an academic, we're always like wanting more access, and then we know that it's difficult because there's also market research, and then it made me think of the use of AI. And recently in academic research, we're using LLMs more frequently. So I don't know, whoever would like to answer, or however relevant it is to the work you're doing now, but do you see in the near future this clash, and then how would it potentially be addressed in terms of research, like academic researchers using LLMs for there's this vicious loop that's creating itself in terms of using data and then research. I'll leave it there.
I don't know who wants to address the question first. Connor, yeah.
I can say something about this, yeah. So yeah, I basically agree with everything you were sort of observing there, Sarah. I think there's a growing, I mean, there's the access to data, and then I think arguably even more of a problem for academia and other independent researchers is access to compute. So I think, this is why we're seeing a sort of brain drain of sorts, and this compute divide between academia and other maybe you could say public interest researchers and the private sector is huge and just growing. I think this applies to data and compute, and it might also kind of apply to the algorithms needed to sort of work on also like synthetic data, but potentially looking a bit towards the future. So this is like a big challenge. I know like in the US they are doing some things like the NAIR in the US is aimed at addressing some of this. And yeah, I think, at least in the work that my institute does, we're always pushing for things like vetted researcher access to AI models. I mean, this would sort of be for testing, like under the Digital Services Act, but we probably want something similar for AI oversight. But yeah, basically, like I completely agree that this is like a challenge encompassing both data, compute, and broadly talent. And yeah, thinking a lot about it without having like the answer to solve it all yet.
Thank you. Anyone else want to comment on that? No? Good. So I have other questions. Have one for Francesca. So you were mentioning concerning risk management and impact assessments. And I was wondering if you could tell us more about how can public sector deployers ensure transparency and accountability in publishing the risk management results, while also balancing security concern because they are dealing with very specific set of information about the users or the government they work for. So can you tell us more about that?
Thank you. Yes, I mean, we have basically this question maybe offers the opportunity to link to the Dutch case itself that was mentioned before, because following the scandal, this was especially, one of the reasons why probably the scandal broke up and the problem was made is that there were issues about the robustness and appropriate data sets used for the training of those systems. And at some point, concerns were raised in that context, and Parliament itself asked the governments to publish data, to share data about how the system worked, because there had already been cases, obviously, of people that had been accused of being fraudsters or mandated to make repayments. So there were already suspicions that the system had identified the wrong people based on discriminatory aspects, bias. But the government refused, exactly raising concerns about the trade, sensitivity of data used for training, trade secrets, and the problem escalated. Eventually, it was clear that they had not conducted fundamental rights impact assessment in a proper way, transparently, and in consultation with human rights experts. So even before the AI Act mandated these free years in the public sector, the Dutch government itself started developing their own FRIA, is called in the Netherlands. And in order to make up, so they realized that their initial concerns about protecting the secrecy, the sensitivity, the trade, intellectual copyright, also of certain systems, had been vastly offset by the damage created in the longer term by the system. So they created their model includes admittedly, we also had as ECNL, we're based in the Netherlands, so we had consultations on how to fine-tune this model. We also had best practices of piloting meaningful engagement of civil society in some of the AI systems in the municipality of Amsterdam. So at that point, it became clear that while it is understandable having to factor in protection of data privacy or sharing of secrets, there has to be from the outset risk and impact assessment that includes elements, as a minimum human rights experts, but ideally also representatives of groups that may be potentially affected, and not because they are not AI experts, but they are rights holders, so they may present the perspective of how their rights and their situations may be impacted. So we strongly advocate for these, and obviously what we advocate for, we realize that in a first phase, it can be just like a broad mapping of and initial assessment of risk, and then based on the initial assessment of the risks, you may decide to which extent you want to involve more external stakeholders or less external stakeholders. So everything has to be proportionate, and obviously the first assessment is done internally. But in order to secure, and again, linking to what Inga mentioned, the false dichotomy of innovation versus protection of human rights. Stronger innovation relies on stronger safeguards that can be voluntary or mandated, but better if they are mandated in our view, at least leaving margin for discretion in the way they are implemented to a certain extent. But the point is that if you guarantee a minimum level of transparency and you adapt that transparency progressively as the life cycle of the AI system pans out, that can be adapted to the different concerns, but it has to be there from the outset. Otherwise, you end up in more trouble than you were trying to solve by being protective of the secrets.
Perfect. Thank you so much. There are a couple of questions in the chat. I think I'll just pick one first and maybe present it to Inga. How concerned should policymakers and regulators be regarding the forthcoming US administration? Inga, what do you think?
Yes, we can already see that many policymakers around the world are concerned for many reasons, and AI is one of those reasons because there's a very clear statement that previous safeguards put in by the current Biden administration for AI will be removed, and that there won't be any regulation because this new incoming administration sees the regulation as bad for innovation. And that is concern for many of policymakers because major AI companies are based in UK, so they initially develop their products very often in US. And that certainly makes also more difficult for other countries to regulate. EU can regulate what happens in its internal market, but if already things which are not in line with fundamental rights have been developed elsewhere, so then these pressures and challenges get much bigger, and that is certainly one of big questions for AI regulation for years to come.
Excellent, thank you. So we're drawing to a close here, but I just wanted to very quickly present one last question for Connor from the chat from Louise Edwards. And she's asked, she has the impression that while there are lots of individual pieces of governance plans or regulation being discussed in the UK, it will be hard for a member of the public to get a view on what safeguards actually are in place on the use of AI, in example, for healthcare. Is there any expectation that sector regulators, like health regulator, will perform that role?
Thanks. Yeah, it's a good question. So yeah, I know, for example, when in the specific example of health, the MHRA is, getting ready to update its thinking on how it regulates medical devices which have AI integrated into them. So a bit, yeah, basically like there's a provision of the AI Act, obviously for AI systems integrated into medical devices, and that will change how those are regulated in the EU. We obviously don't have an equivalent of the AI Act in the UK, but the sector-specific regulators are preparing for to update their own like market review mechanisms, and the MHRA is actively thinking about this. Yeah, so that's happening at the sector-specific level.
Perfect. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating. Thank you, Francesca, Tekla, Inga, and Connor. Thank you to everyone in the audience. And please stay tuned to our LinkedIn/Twitter or X/Blue Sky accounts for more upcoming events in the next few months. Thank you so much for this very interesting discussion, and we'll share the recording soon if you want to, watch it again or share it more largely. Thank you so much for your time and have a good afternoon.
Can I just make a small comment before everybody leaves? Just reminding everyone that we do a blog, and we're very excited to receive your thoughts and your research, and even if it's just sort of a short mention of what's going on, because we know that AI policy, for example, is something that's constantly adapting and changing. So yeah, please send them our way to anyone that's part of the committee or to like X, Blue Sky and everything accounts. We'd be delighted.
Thank you.
Very good point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Perfect. Have a good afternoon and thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye.